Welcome back to the Bridgehead, everyone. We have a few stories for you today. We're going to be covering Justin Trudeau again as we get closer and closer to an election in October of 2025. Obviously, a lot of social issues that we cover here at the Bridgehead are going to be coming up. And so what Justin Trudeau and the Liberals virtually always do when they're getting shellacked in the polls is they pivot to abortion. Abortion in Canada, of course, has been decriminalized throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. Canada is the only developed country with that status quo. And yet Justin Trudeau considers it convenient to constantly act as if abortion rights are under threat. I really wish they were. I work full-time for the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, organization that's dedicated to making abortion unthinkable. And so if abortion rights right now, from a legal perspective, truly were at threat, I'd be doing a good news segment about that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But what Trudeau does is he always returns to Old Faithful. He returns to abortion. So here is one video clip of him in the House of Commons recently. Check it out.
Mr. Speaker, every time the Leader of the Opposition gets up on his feet to rhyme off his little show, his party members applaud enthusiastically. But the 2 times he just stood up to suggest that he is perhaps pro-choice, silence from his team, Mr. Speaker. He cannot protect women's rights from the members of his own caucus, Mr. Speaker. That's not standing up for women. That's not protecting the future. That's not freedom in this country.
Now, that performance wasn't surprising. I've written probably a couple of dozen articles on Trudeau's comments on abortion since 2015, and the goal is twofold. I mentioned earlier on an earlier episode of this podcast, one of Trudeau's goals here is not to get more votes for himself, because anybody who's a diehard abortion supporter is probably already in his corner, or maybe voting Green or NDP for that matter. What he's trying to do is he's trying to really suppress conservative voter turnout, because most pro-life people vote conservative, and Pierre Poilievre is not pro-life. In fact, he is avowedly pro-choice, more so even than Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper did enforce the abortion status quo, but he would never say whether or not he was pro-choice or pro-life, and it was actually difficult to tell what his personal views on the issue are. Pierre Poilievre was pro-life. He had a perfect pro-life voting record, and my former colleague Stephanie Gray, who's a renowned abortion debater who later moved to the States, remembers actually seeing Pierre Poilievre at a national campus Life Network conference years ago. This is a conference for pro-life student activists, which means that Pierre didn't just casually identify as pro-life. He identified as pro-life strongly enough to attend a conference where activists were actually getting trained. And I'd wondered for a long time where he changed his mind, but it seems pretty clear. His biographer, my friend Andrew Lawton, said that essentially he married a pro-choice woman from Quebec, and that is where he got his views on abortion from. And so Pierre is very pro-choice. He constantly affirms the fact that he's not going to touch the abortion status quo. So Trudeau has to work really, really hard to try and make abortion a political issue. I wish our side was doing that. To be fair, though, to Justin Trudeau, he is genuinely passionate about this issue. And you can see that in all the clips where he talks about abortion. Is he gets really fired up. He often gets intensely angry when he's talking about it. He does like some real foam fleck performances over the last several years, and almost always when he's talking about abortion. And my view is that the reason for that is sort of deeply personal for Justin Trudeau, because abortion is actually a fundamental part of the Trudeau family legacy. Most of you who are Canadian will probably know that it was Justin Trudeau's father, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who initially decriminalized abortion back in 1969. And Trudeau, Pierre, that is, Trudeau the Elder, despite the fact that he claimed to be a Catholic and he did attend Mass very, very regularly, not only did he bring abortion in, but he lived a very sexually revolutionary lifestyle, famously dated and slept with a lot of rich and famous people. And he fathered a daughter with Deborah Coyne at the age of 71. And what's interesting about that, this would be, of course, Trudeau's half-sister. He took pains to inform Deborah Coyne that he had no desire to be a parent to his only daughter, and even discouraged Deborah Coyne and his daughter from living in the same city as him. He had a very pro-choice approach to parenting, in other words. So Pierre Trudeau is one half of this puzzle. Abortion is a fundamental part of his political legacy, and he had a very pro-choice approach to his own parenting. But I think his passion for abortion, Justin's that is, lies not with his father, but more with his mother Margaret Trudeau, who has talked openly about the fact that she had an abortion. She expressed her support for abortion and birth control very early on, telling the media way back in the 70s already that her view on these issues was very liberal. And later in an interview she granted to Playgirl magazine in 1979, it was a bit of a train wreck interview. Vanity Fair would refer to it as one of the biggest mistakes of her life. She recounted, among other things, that she'd had an abortion at the age of 17. And I wonder sometimes if the fact that our current prime minister's half-sibling was aborted has ever given him any pause at all, or if that revelation has instead really informed and solidified his own support for abortion. We see this in pro-life activism all the time, that somebody, if they're really angry and passionately pro-choice, they're usually pro-choice not for just sort of vaguely political reasons or philosophical reasons. Usually if they're pro-abortion in a way that indicates it's a deeply held belief, they're often not defending abortion itself. They're defending somebody that they care about. And so they don't want to say abortion is wrong because they don't want to say their mother was wrong or their girlfriend was wrong or their sister was wrong. And when we're talking about abortion on the streets, this means that we have to actually get to the heart of the issue, find out why they support abortion and address that. And so I think the fact that Margaret Trudeau talked about having an abortion and that at least one of Justin Trudeau's half-siblings died by abortion has a lot to do with where his support comes from. But I do wish that conservatives would attack Justin Trudeau more solidly on his very overt anti-Christian bigotry, which almost always comes out, again, when he's talking about abortion. Consider this clip here for just a minute.
Speaker, it's obvious that the Leader of the Opposition really didn't like that I went down to New York City to talk directly to Americans. Perhaps he would have been happier if I accepted an all-expenses-paid trip perhaps down to Florida to appear at an anti-abortion church. I know he would have been all right with that because that's what he allows of his own members.
Now, I can't find the article in Le Journal de Montréal. I probably butchered that pronunciation. It's a Quebecois publication that Trudeau is referring to in that clip. The Liberal Party also posted that headline as an attack ad on September 24. But the fact that appearing at a pro-life church is considered a line of attack is very, very revealing. Trudeau calls himself a Catholic, although he doesn't attend church much, and he publicly rejects Catholic Church teaching on, at very minimum, both abortion and the entire LGBT agenda. When he does show up for church, though, he is appearing at an anti-abortion church. When he met with the Pope, he was appearing at an anti-abortion church because the Roman Catholic Church, of course, is pro-life. The same thing would be true for many of his MPs and many other parliamentarians, period, because many very pro-abortion politicians still attend very, very pro-life churches. And when they do so, they are appearing at an anti-abortion church. But according to Trudeau and apparently the Liberals' comm shop, which probably came up with this ad, this is apparently something to be angrily condemned in Parliament. Now, this is an opportunity for conservatives to go on the attack. I've said this many times on this podcast already, even though we're only a few episodes in. There's an enormous amount of common ground that the Conservative Party of Canada could make with social conservatives because Justin Trudeau provides them opportunity after opportunity to defend Canadians who hold to the same views that Canadians have held throughout the majority of Canadian history. And in this case, the tent is even bigger because millions of Canadians worship in anti-abortion churches and indeed anti-abortion temples, synagogues, mosques, boudoirs, and other houses of worship. And the Conservatives should respond to this line of attack, not by reiterating again that they're not going to change abortion law in Canada. They should ask Justin Trudeau and all of his intermediaries, do they believe that Canadians who worship at these places should be attacked for doing so? Does Justin Trudeau and the Liberals think that attending an anti-abortion church and actually believing the teachings of that church, do they think that's disqualifying for participation in public life? And if they do, how can they expect those Canadians to vote for their party? I attend an anti-abortion church, and with the exception of a few dying institutions like the United Church, which earned the nickname the NDP at prayer for a reason, so do those who attend Catholic, Orthodox, Baptist, Pentecostal, and most evangelical churches. Except for the churches that have caved on these issues and gone mainline, most of which are slowly but surely dying off, most Canadians who attend church attend an anti-abortion church. And the same thing, again, is true for Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Orthodox Jews, Mormons. Most people adhere to a religious tradition that explicitly condemns abortion. And all of the traditions I just mentioned do, in fact, explicitly condemn abortion. But as I've noted before, Trudeau and those around him are motivated explicitly by anti-Christian bigotry. And that's one of the reasons he's taken such a lackadaisical approach, for example, to the fact that over 100 Christian churches have been either vandalized or burned down since the 2021 lie that there was graves outside residential schools filled with children who it was presumed had been abused or killed. Justin Trudeau's Canada has no room for believing Christians, and Christians should notice that. Justin Trudeau's Canada is one of pride parades, not pro-life marches. And conservatives should call him out on that, because Trudeau talks a lot about inclusion, but what he means by inclusion is people look differently but think the same. They might have different skin colors, different races, different cultures, but they all believe the exact same thing on abortion and the LGBT agenda and everything else. And by making these attacks, he's actually left his flank wide open. And I really wish the Conservatives would think of going for it. For our second story today, I want to take a look at a recent interview between Jen Psaki and Doug Emhoff. Now, for those of you who are unaware of who these two people are, Jen Psaki served for 2 years as Joe Biden's press secretary, which essentially means that she spent 2 years pretending he was fine, covering up his cognitive decline, acting as if all the things that we were actually seeing were not happening. And so with that experience, she was very well suited to go work for MSNBC. Basically, same mission, different department. And she did an interview with Doug Emhoff, who is the husband of Vice President and current presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris. And it's a really nauseating interview. Instead of trying to explain it, take a look at just this 1 minute from the interview here.
Something that has also been an important part or an interesting part of how people have talked about your role here is how your role has reshaped the perception of masculinity. And I'm not sure you planned on that, but you are an incredibly supportive spouse. Has that been an evolution for you? And do you think that's part of the role you might play as First Gentleman?
It's funny, I've started to think a lot about this. I've always been like this. My dad was like this. And to me, it's the right thing to do. You know, support women. It's mutual. Like with Kamala and I, we support each other. We have each other's back. And I've said many times, when we lift up women, we support women, whether it's pay equity, childcare, family leave, and all these issues that, this post-Dobbs hellscape, women should not be less than. Women should not have less rights and be treated differently. That's not the American way.
So that was Jen Psaki asking Doug Emhoff, why is he such a paragon of masculinity? And you see Doug kind of, chuckling, deeply gruntled that he's been asked this question and saying, well, I actually can't help being so amazing. My father was equally as amazing. And we just work really hard at being amazing and doing the right thing. Now, it takes real chutzpah for a husband, and this is important, who abandoned his first wife and children after impregnating the teacher at his children's school. The story actually broke a couple of months ago, and I didn't think it was worth covering at the time because the sordid lives of Democrats would keep any reporter busy, and there's really nothing edifying in the viewers knowing this information. But now that you've got Jen Psaki and MSNBC kind of claiming he represents some sort of shift in masculinity, if that's the claim they're going to make on TV, I think it's worth asking, well, what kind of man is Doug Emhoff? And the unfortunate thing is a pretty shabby man indeed. Again, he ended up getting the teacher of his children pregnant, and then mysteriously she wasn't pregnant anymore. Neither Doug nor the teacher have ever addressed what happened to the baby. Ben Shapiro has stated they very, very likely aborted the baby. One of her friends talked to the press, probably with her permission, said they had a miscarriage. We don't know the details, but this blew up his family. So Doug Emhoff left his wife, left his 2 children. And when this broke a couple of months back, here was the statement he released. During my first marriage, Kirsten and I went through some tough times on account of my actions. I took responsibility, and in the years since, we worked through things as a family and have come out stronger on the other side. think about that for a minute. So we worked through some things as a family. The things they were working through was the fact that he'd impregnated the teacher of his children. That teacher was not, unfortunately, his wife, and have come out stronger on the other side, as in they were no longer a family because he had blown that up by getting their teacher pregnant. Only a truly delusional and self-absorbed person would claim that his family came out stronger after he destroyed that family through his infidelity, and then later claim on TV that being a supportive spouse is something that he's always done and that, quote, it's the right thing to do. Emhoff was a homewrecker, and I think most of you probably know Kamala Harris was as well. She spent years functioning as the side piece for California politician Willie Brown while he was married. He, in fact, is still alive. He's very, very old because he was about 30 years older than Kamala at the time, and he's still married. She knew he was married, and at the same time, she was openly going out with him, and she was his girlfriend. She was his mistress. And so these two people are now at the top of the Democratic ticket. And what was the phrase Joe Biden used again during the only presidential debate that he participated in? I think he referred to Donald Trump as having the morals of an alley cat. That, I think, is a pretty good description of Doug Emhoff and Kamala Harris. Now, what's more disturbing about the story is that despite all of her fawning, Jen Psaki wasn't totally wrong, because Doug Emhoff does actually, in many ways, represent the new masculinity of our post-sexual revolution culture. In this new culture, with this new masculinity, men are boldly and bravely feminist. Why? Because they feel entitled to the bodies of women. They want to have access to the bodies of women without taking care of the children that are conceived as a result. And for men of Emhoff's type, abortion isn't so much a choice for women as it is an obligation. It's your problem. You get that taken care of. That's why we gave you Planned Parenthood. The sexual revolution only works. It only works if we have a backstop, if we have a way of getting rid of all the children who are conceived through sterile sex. And it's no surprise then that both Harris and Emhoff are devout abortion activists, because of course they are. The abortion industry functions as the fail-safe for keeping the revolution they are both committed to. And indeed, later in the same interview, Emhoff bemoaned the fact that his daughter Ella might not have the same rights that his mother did because Roe v. Wade was overturned. Because Emhoff knows that nothing is more important than abortion, because you just never know when it might be necessary. Now, recent studies have indicated that a majority of abortions in the United States include some form of pressure. I can speak from personal experience as a pro-life activist. I have heard from hundreds of women and young girls that they had abortions because they felt like they had to. Because in a culture that teaches you that you can have recreational sex and that if the woman gets pregnant, she can just have an abortion. Again, abortion isn't just a choice at that point. It's an expectation, because the guy headed into the relationship not expecting to have a child and not wanting one. And so if a child occurs, if the act of reproduction works, then the woman is just expected to take care of it. Choice is farcical in our abortion regime. And unfortunately, Jen Psaki is right in one area. Doug Emhoff is a pretty good example of what masculinity has become in our post-sexual revolution culture, and a pretty good example of what men have become in a culture where abortion is the norm and where casual and recreational sex are a normative form of human relationships. And that takes me to the third story, which is the absolute barrage of bloody propaganda coming from the American mainstream press. Now, abortion has been a significant factor in every American election since roughly 1980. But 2024 is undoubtedly the abortion election. Harris is doing a 50-stop reproductive rights tour. Abortion was the main subject from the main stage of the Democratic National Convention. There was, of course, an abortion van outside the DNC in Chicago that killed more than 25 babies as Democrats cheered their bloodthirsty leaders inside. This is the abortion election. It's being run on abortion. And so the mainstream media is really stepping up to do its part and to make sure that middle America, that vast group of people who are ambiguous about abortion, They are sort of very uncomfortable with a lot of aspects of abortion. They really despise late-term abortion. They're not fully pro-life like I am and like any consistently pro-life person is. And those people are really up for grabs. And we've been seeing the polls go all over the place after remaining pretty consistent since 1991. Now they're going all over the place. And one of the reasons for that is the mainstream press is forcing horror story after horror story down the throats of the American people. And these stories are egregious lies. And let me give you a couple of examples. So one of the things I should add that makes this difficult is that Donald Trump has backed away from the abortion issue. And so that's made it more difficult for the pro-life movement to sort of counter this blinding barrage of propaganda, because pro-life groups are being outspent by massive margins in every state level referendum. And Planned Parenthood and progressive mega donors are opening up their war chests. Now, let's take a look at a few of the major stories that have been released by the American press just in the last several weeks. And notice here, then, in several of these cases, these stories just aren't untrue. They're the precise opposite of the truth. So here's probably the worst example. On September 23, CNN ran a long-form story titled, "She was accused of murder after losing her pregnancy. South Carolina woman now tells her story." So the narrative here was that women are being locked up for their miscarriages, which is something that abortion activists say will happen. They say this in the States. It's a very common theme that abortion activists use in Latin America and South America as well. This idea that if preborn children have rights in the womb, that women are going to be investigated for every miscarriage they have. Now, they don't have any real stories of that taking place, so what they have to do is find stories that they can somehow sell as buttressing that false narrative. And this story went viral. Progressive politicians posted it, they pushed it really hard, and then that allowed the media to do a second wave of coverage, because first they publish a lie, then the politicians cover that lie, then they cover the politicians' reaction and the public reaction to their lie. It's a really, really neat trick, and it's sort of an airtight feedback loop where the truth hardly has a chance, and pro-lifers can't get a word in edgewise. And the story went international almost right away as well. The Independence headline, that's a UK publication, read, "A college student lost her pregnancy. Then she was accused of homicide." But this narrative was completely false, and the media knew it. So the story was about a young woman named Amari Marsh. She didn't actually have a miscarriage. She gave birth to a live, premature daughter into a toilet. And then with her daughter in the toilet, she called 911. And the emergency dispatcher repeatedly told Marsh to take the little girl out of the toilet, but Marsh did not. What Marsh said was, even though she had the wherewithal to call 911, that she even couldn't get herself together, and that's why she left her daughter in the toilet. Now, the infant still showed signs of life when the first responders showed up, and they tried to save her life, but unfortunately, tragically, she did not survive. And so Marsh was then arrested, again, not for a miscarriage, but for not taking her daughter out of the toilet when the dispatcher repeatedly urged her to. The warrant stated that her refusal was a, quote, proximate cause of her daughter's death. Now, this case was dropped when the grand jury, for various reasons, decided there was no probable cause to proceed with a criminal trial, but the case had nothing to do with pro-life laws. Nothing. It's apropos, I think, that abortion activists are confusing infanticide with abortion, but there was nothing about abortion actually in this story. But CNN's whole story, if you read through it, portrays the whole ordeal as a story about pro-life laws and why the restoration of abortion rights is so essential. And only in paragraph 35, after talking for dozens of paragraphs about how the story is about pro-life laws, how it's about abortion, in paragraph 35, CNN says this, quote, Solicitor David Pascoe, a Democrat elected to South Carolina's 1st Judicial Circuit, whose office handled Marsh's prosecution, said issues of abortion and reproductive rights weren't relevant to this case. So for a couple of days, Democrats talked about how we were going to lock women up for having miscarriages, even though the women in question didn't even have a miscarriage. Then we had the media covering the follow-up to the panic that they created by pushing a false narrative that they spent dozens of paragraphs covering in paragraph 35, just so they couldn't be accused of overtly lying. They quote the prosecutor saying the story has nothing to do with abortion after presenting it as a story all about abortion. Now, what's really insidious here is that the media has been falsely claiming that women are dying because of pro-life laws. And it seems to be a very closely guarded secret that it is legal in every single state. In every single state in the United States, Ella DeSantis of National Review published an entire state-by-state breakdown of the laws. It is always legal to get life-saving interventions, miscarriage care, or any form of health care a woman might require. Abortion, contrary to Planned Parenthood's claims, is not in fact health care. It's the brutal destruction of a living human being. But any form of actually life-saving health care is legal. And in fact, the disinformation that Democrats and abortion activists are spreading by consistently claiming that this is not the case is genuinely dangerous. But they are willing to risk the lives of women in order to score political points. They are willing to create danger for women in order to assert that it's important to get rid of abortion laws. But it gets even worse. Even when women die from legal abortion using a dangerous method that pro-life advocates have consistently warned about, the media still claims that pro-life laws are at fault. This is really gaslighting at its finest. So this is another story that happened very, very recently. It's the case of Georgia woman Amber Thurman. Now, Thurman died when she took abortion pills that she took to abort her twins at 9 weeks gestation. But the pills, as they sometimes do, failed to produce an entire abortion. And as a result, she went septic because her babies were decomposing inside her. This is a risk that's literally listed on the side of the black box that abortion pills come in. Thurman went to the hospital, but doctors decided not to immediately intervene and remove the infected fetal remains from her body with a dilatation and curettage, or D&C procedure, despite the fact that this procedure is specifically permitted under Georgia law because both of the babies had already died. They had been killed by a legal abortion. But what happened? Well, the media promptly claimed that Amber Thurman had not been killed by a legal abortion, had not been killed by a dangerous medication pushed by Democrats, pushed by abortion activists. No, Amber Thurman had died because of pro-life laws in Georgia. So MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell claimed that D&C procedures are illegal in Georgia, and this is false. It is illegal to use a D&C procedure to dismember a living child in the womb, but it is not wrong. It is not illegal to use a D&C to remove fetal remains after the child has passed, whether because of a miscarriage or, in Thurman's case, because she aborted her twins with pills. The Daily Beast made almost an identical claim. And what actually happened here is that a woman tragically died due to a known side effect of a dangerous abortion drug. But the narrative pushed by the press is that Thurman died because of laws protecting unborn children. And almost weeks later, a second similar case in which a woman named Candy Miller died after taking abortion pills that she ordered online was presented in the exact same way. So even the ugly cases of do-it-yourself at-home abortions, which Democrats have been pushing hard for, they've been pushing for the distribution of abortion pills as a way of circumventing pro-life laws, and they brought in a mass distribution of abortion pills as a COVID-19 measure with the intention of making it permanent. Now, the very harms that pro-lifers warned about are coming to pass, but Democrats are saying that when women die from legal abortions, it's still somehow the fault of pro-life laws. See, neat trick. Neat trick. It's really insidious. It's really insidious. You see in all of these stories, it's not just that abortion activists are lying. It's that their narrative is precisely the opposite of the truth. American abortion activists are using the exact same playbook that they used in Ireland and Malta and elsewhere, which is incessantly claim that abortion restrictions result in women dying, and then persuade the middle majority that pro-life laws are anything but. Some of you will know that I wrote an entire book on Ireland's pro-life movement and the campaign to keep the Eighth Amendment to the Irish Constitution. A referendum in 2018 repealed the 18th Amendment to the Eighth Amendment, to the Irish Constitution. And the reason so many Irish people voted to repeal that was because they were convinced that a woman named Savita Halappanavar, who died of septicemia, in fact died because she denied an abortion. Even though every single forensic examination, every single autopsy confirmed that, just like in the case of Ms. Thurman, Savita Halap and Avar died due to medical malpractice or medical mismanagement, or the doctors simply doing the wrong thing. It had nothing to do with abortion, and at the same time now, babies in Ireland are being aborted in their tens of thousands because that narrative was successfully sold to the public. They tried the same thing in Malta a couple of years ago. Very fortunately, pro-life activists put up an enormous fight in Malta and successfully managed to keep abortion out of Malta for the time being. But they ran the exact same playbook there. They found a woman who claimed that she needed an abortion to survive. Maltese doctor said that she did not need an abortion to save her life, and so instead she flew to a different country and got an abortion there. I believe it was in Spain. But fortunately, Malta did not legalize abortion as a result. And in fact, pro-life countries like Poland, Malta, Chile, and Ireland pre-2018 have better maternal health outcomes than abortion regimes. While American abortion activists claim nonstop that abortion is necessary for maternal health, when the exact opposite is actually the case. And abortion activists just drown these truths out in a roar of lies. So this is one of the reasons pro-life activists are facing such a brutal uphill battle in these state-level referendums. Because even a lot of people who don't like abortion, a lot of people who are very ambiguous about abortion, when they're constantly faced with news articles that say, this woman, was charged with murder for having a miscarriage, when in fact, she was charged, even though the charges were dropped, because she left her baby girl to drown in a toilet. Or a woman died because doctors could not give her the care that she needed to save her life because of pro-life laws, when in fact, she died because she legally aborted her twins, and that legal abortion was very dangerous. It's on the black box warning again. It's very, very difficult to compete with these narratives because the abortion movement essentially owns the press. So pro-lifers are fighting a real uphill battle, which is why we have to go to the streets. We have to go door to door. We have to go out and talk to pro-choice people and to correct these narratives. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It's a brutal uphill battle. We'll try to cover these stories on this podcast. I write for a bunch of different publications on these issues. First Things, World Magazine, The European Conservative. And so we do our best to use media that still does value the sanctity of life to rebut these lies. But it is very tough to get those rebuttals to the people who need to hear them. So if you found this helpful at all, please share the video around, leave a comment, like the video so that people will see it in their feeds. We really do appreciate you taking the time to watch this podcast. We hope that some part of it or all of it was helpful to you in kind of understanding the crazy culture that we live in. If you like the content, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you can find us pretty much wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Once again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.